Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm Emmanuel, I'm a 737 pilot and a member of PMDG's tech team. With the Christmas update 2022, PMDG have finally reintroduced the EFIS map displays after they have originally been disabled due to some simulator rendering issues causing flickering of the displays, which has been fixed with Sim Update 10, but only now PMDG actually got around to finally reintroducing the displays into our simulator. So here we're sitting on the ground in Las Vegas in the Southwest Boeing 737-700, and we're about to make our way to Seattle, and I will use this flight to show you a couple of the details that these instruments come with. Now, first of all, you might be wondering, we have those lovely PFD and ND, so why on earth would we need an EFIS map display? Well, the answer to that is quite simple. While the PFD and ND are great as what they are, when the 737NG was introduced, there was actually a debate going on amongst airlines and Boeing as to how the cockpit of the NG should be designed to provide maximum commonality with the 737 classic aircraft. And especially big operators like Southwest or Continental, but for example also Air Berlin, have been using the NG initially not as a complete substitute to the 737 Classic, but as an addition to the fleet, so pilots were flying both parts, the 737 Classic and the NGs. Now, therefore, some sort of commonality between the cockpits was actually needed. This went so far that originally Boeing even planned to deliver the 737 NG with a cockpit that would have been more like the Boeing 777, which was developed at the same time and actually flew a year earlier than the 737 NG. So that's something people rarely think about, that the 777 is actually an older aircraft than the Boeing 737 next generation. However, in the end, due to popular requests from airlines like Southwest, Boeing decided to make the flight deck very similar so that the type rating would go for both aircraft, the Classic and the NG. And that's where, on top of the new developments of the PFD and ND layout, they requested, or they as in the airlines, requested a layout that looked somewhat similar for pilots to make it easier to transition between the two types, or between the two fleets. So that's how Boeing came up with the EFIS map layout, and that one is selectable in the PMDG options display and then page 1. So let's go ahead and have a look at that. Get a menu, PMDG setup, aircraft, displays, and right up here on page 1 you can select between the PFD ND and the EFIS map style layouts. So if we go PFD ND, that is what you guys are used to. And then of course we can select the EFIS map style displays. Be aware that there are some very rarely used features, like you can go PFD ND and then you can select where is it? Then you can select the engine side-by-side display that you know from the EFIS map layout together with the PFD and navigation display style displays. But that is something that is only rarely used, you guys just saw that I even had to search for it. So up here is where you can select those displays. Now let's have a quick look into what these instruments actually look like. And in order to do that, let me first of all align the IRS. We can see it is blinking up here already, which indicates the IRS has finished its alignment process and requires an input by the user. So let's go ahead and do that in a draft, and we take the GPS left position, copy that into set IRS, and here we are. This is how our EFIS map style instruments look like when they are fully aligned. So let's have a quick look then into what is actually available. And for that, we will first of all have a look into the real Boeing 737 Classic aircraft that this one is inspired from. And thank you very much for Wikimedia for providing this superb photo. And we can see that we have the airspeed indicator, altimeter, and everything basic in the classic T layout that we have in our instruments. Now, we will closely see this replicated with the EFIS map style layout. So if we have a look into this, then we have our speed indicator, our ADI, our altimeter, our vertical speed indicator, our RMI, and then of course the 737 Classic has the entire navigation display down here but there is not enough space on the 737NG's instruments to do that, and that's why we have the navigation display up to the right over here. So the thing pretty much works like you are used to from the full screen display. It just looks a little bit smaller. Also be aware of the changes to the engine instruments, so let's have another look into the 737 Classic layout. We can see that we have those, they called them digital instruments back in the day, but I would really call them very, very basic digital instruments. Anyway, what you can see is we have the takeoff modes indicated at the top with the N1, above that EGT, N2, fuel flow, and then on the right hand side we have those instruments that we would find on the secondary engine display in the 737NG on the lower display unit on the right hand side, which is the oil pressure, oil temperature, and so on. So that's how it looks like in the 737 Classic, and that's how it looks like in the 737NG with the EFIS map style display as well. So there are a couple things that you need to be aware of as you are flying this aircraft, and we will take this one off block now towards Seattle, and I will see you again as we approach the runway, where I'm going to give you a couple more explanations on flying the 737 with this style of instruments. We're taxiing towards runway 19 left at Las Vegas at the moment, and I would like to give you a brief introduction about what to have a look at as we are going to take off very soon. So here's a little introduction on the stuff that you need to watch out for when we take off with the EFIS map style instruments. First of all, one thing you are surely going to notice is that the FMAs do look a little bit different. Basically, the flight director annunciation has shifted to the top right, and that is also where you're going to get your autopilot indications, while the other three FMAs that you are used to from the standard PFD layouts are now moved slightly to the left-hand side over here. The other thing is the readability of the airspeed indicator. So you will notice that things seem very close to one another on the speed indicator, and that unfortunately is unavoidable with the instrument being quite a bit smaller. However, do be aware that on classic generation aircraft types, the speed indicator was usually quite cramped as well, so I'll give you a brief introduction into what to look out for right now as I'm about to stop the airplane on the holding point here. And what we can see is basically the following. V1 and VR are pretty close to one another, and it might be very difficult to actually distinguish the actual speeds just by looking at the needle of the speed indicator. Therefore, what I recommend, during the takeoff briefing, during taxi, you're going to review those speeds anyway, so 133, 135, 140. So my recommendation, except for the needle that gives you a brief look into where you approximately are on the speed, also have a look at the digital readout of the actual airspeed in the middle of the indicator. So personally I would recommend to take the speeds from there, rather than try to read something precisely from the actual scale on the speed indicator. Our VRF plus 20 buck is of course still there, and we have our standard speed box that we are used to as well as the barber pole, which slightly changed from black and red toward white and red. Apart from that, something that is slightly different as well is the layout of the radio altimeter. So the majority of aircraft will have the round radio altimeter option here, however there is an option in the FMC where you can change this. Finally, the altimeter has that little green buck that indicates your minimum, shown like this now, and be aware that for a correct minimum callout to play, you still need to rotate this to the correct value, but I'm going to go into that in a little bit more detail as we're about to approach Seattle later on. Apart from that, in terms of the engine instruments, there is not really any major change there. You still operate them the very same way, and even though this is now based on the classics, which did not have that little white arc telling you where your thrust lever position is, in the NG they still have it, so you can still pre-select your thrust precisely. Another change that you will notice is up here on the MFD, the previous engine and system switches are now labeled in-up, and you are no longer able to pull any display up on here on the bottom, because the hydraulics indications have moved to the engine display now, and that is pretty much all that there is. So with that, we are all ready for takeoff, so let's go ahead and get ourselves into the air. I've prepared the aircraft for full L and VNAV departure, and that is what we're about to do, really. Before takeoff checklist below the line, MCP, set, transponder, TARA, strobe lights on, landing lights on, before takeoff checks complete. Clear on the right, clear on the left, and we are all ready to go. Timing. Stabilized. Set takeoff thrust. Takeoff thrust set, indications normal. Tracked.
V1. Rotate. Positive rate of climb.
You're up. Now. I've programmed VNAV to start the acceleration when we are passing 1,500 above the ground, which is now. You can see the speed bug moving up, but it is not all that easy to actually see the speed bug up there. And as we're about to pass the 1 speed, we're going to select flaps up. So, flaps up. For that, our low speed indications come in as well. First flap retraction after takeoff. And that is the initial departure using the EFIS and map display instruments. Just take note of the low speed indication that just came into view on the airspeed indicator as we retracted our flaps. So that happens whenever you retract the flaps for the first step after your takeoff. And that is pretty much the entire thing there is about the takeoff in the EFIS map instruments. So thank you very much for watching until here, and I see you back on the approaching to Seattle to tell you a couple of the details for the arrival as well. We are currently in the climb out from Vegas, passing level 260, and here is a little feature that is actually not available in the EFIS map layout that is standard in the PFD-ND layout, and that is the alerting in case your altimeter is set to an incorrect setting. So we can see from the performance in its screen that our transition altitude is set to 18,000 feet, and we can see that Econ Climb is currently the active phase. So above 18,000 feet, if you were flying with a PFD ND layout, the altimeter would turn amber to alert you that you have not set it to standard. This is not the case on the EFIS map aircraft, so on this one you actually have to think about turning the altimeter to standard yourself. So let's go ahead and do that now. Talking about altimeters and standard settings, you are not able to pre-select a QNH in the EFIS map layout like you are in the PFD-ND layout in the 737 NGs. So be aware, you cannot pre-select this. If you are flying along and you are changing your altimeter, then it is immediately going to change live without any options to jump around between standard and local settings. Welcome back on our approach into Seattle. We're just about to dive down into the clouds on a right-hand downwind for Romeo 16 right, and I want to give you a couple more details about exactly what we have to watch out for with the EFIS map instruments on an approach. So the first thing is the barometric minimum. It might be easy just to select the nearest hundreds without setting the thousands, in case you're running on a minima that is higher than 1,000 feet, because obviously the buck is going to be set automatically on the altimeter anyway. However, in order for the system to work correctly and in order for it to give you the minimums callouts, you will actually need to select the thousands as well. So right now selected 615, which is our minimum down in Seattle. However, if we were approaching with a minimum of 1,615, then I would have to turn the buck all the way around the altimeter to the 1,615 setting. So that's something to keep an eye on, because obviously while the buck is just showing correctly on the hundreds on the altimeter scale, the callout is still dependent on the thousands being dialed in correctly as well. The next important thing to check over here is your flap reference speeds. So it is pretty easy to read the reference speeds incorrectly. So of course you can just set the buck anywhere close to where you want them to be, but from a normal perspective, hitting that buck is quite a challenge. So what I would personally recommend to trick the system is to have a look into the VNAV descent page, and as soon as you have passed the deceleration point, you're going to see your target flap speed down here in the speed restriction page. Another option is to go from the approach reference page, take the VREF 40. If you add 70 knots to that, then you have your flaps up maneuvering speed, 50 knots flaps 1, 30 knots flaps 5, and so on. But that is another way how you can easily and quickly determine the flap reference speeds if you find it hard to read the indicator. Okay, flaps 1. Now once again, if you take your flap reference speed, you go from up to 1, just subtract 20 knots. So 178 is going to be our next flap speed. If you zoom in fully on the speed indicator, then you can sort of see it as well on the dial, but just my piece of advice, be careful there that you actually set your speed correctly. Fly slope capture. flaps 5. Again, from flaps 1 to flaps 5 is 20 knots off, so we're looking at 158 knots right here. Very noted. Also, slight functionality difference here from the PFD ND layout to the EFIS map layout is that you are going to see the DME of your ILS just above the RMI. Normally, the ILS DME would not be seen on the navigation display if you had the PFD ND layout, but only if you are actually using the EFIS map layout, you're going to see the ILS DME up here as well. Okay, gear down, flap 15. From flaps 5 to flaps 15 it is normally 10 knots off, so 148 is what we're going to use for now. And then we can start with the landing checklist. Start switches, continuous, recall, check, speed brake, armed green light, landing gear down 3 green. Holding at the flaps, so flaps 30. And here comes the next challenge. That is setting your VREF correctly, because in the 800, or sorry, in any of the aircraft with the PFD and ND layout, you could simply set the speed box so that the top of the box lies on the reference speed, and that would give you a perfect indication of your VREF plus 5 speed. But not so in the EFIS map layout. So the width of that buck over here is more than 5 knots. So I actually have to look in here. Okay, 136 is what we need. Here we go, 136. And you can see how VREF plus 5 cannot be set as easily using the EFIS map layout than it can be using the PFD ND layout. So that's another specialty that we have to take into account. And that basically concludes our look into the EFIS map displays. Now, I know you guys love to see my landings, so let's go ahead with that and bring our airplane down. In the meantime, I would like to say thank you very much for tuning in. I hope that you are going to enjoy the new style of instruments. And no, I don't have any EFB news quite yet. However, thank you very much for your attention. As always, if you do want to support the channel, you can do so through the Buy Me Coffee link in the video description below. But don't at least forget to like, comment and subscribe. Thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to see you all again very soon.
Approaching decision height. Minimums. 50, 40, 30, 10.